All right, we've been in Genesis for a while, and we had almost to the end of chapter 35, and we kind of wound down there, but I'm going to go back and pick up at the 16th verse of 35 and review a little bit of that before we pick up on 36, which is just full of a lot of names. You can send this off to anybody in your family who is expecting a baby and say, if you're having trouble picking a name, look in Genesis 36. You can find all kinds of names you can pick from. Anyway, at the 16th verse, then they journeyed from Bethel, and when they were still some distance from Ephrath, Rachel was in childbirth, and she had hard labor, and when she was in her hard labor, the midwife said to her, "Do not be afraid, for now you will have another son." And as her soul was departing, for she died, she named him Ben-Oni, but his father called him Benjamin. So Rachel died, and she was buried on the way to Ephrath. And then we have a parenthesis, that is Bethlehem. And Jacob set up a pillar at her grave. It is the pillar of Rachel's tomb, which is there to this day. Not to our day, but at the day of the writing. Israel journeyed on, and Israel pitched his tent beyond the tower of Eder. And while Israel lived in the land around Eder, Reuben went and lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine, who was also Rachel's maidservant. And Israel heard of it. Period. Now the sons of Jacob, so we don't have any response to after he heard what he said or did or anything at this point. Now the sons of Jacob were 12. The sons of Leah, Reuben, Jacob's firstborn, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and the sons of Rachel, Joseph and Benjamin. The sons of Bilhah, Rachel's maid, she had two sons, Dan and Naphtali. And then the sons of Zilpah, Leah's maid, Gad and Asher. And these were the sons of Jacob, who were born to him in the Paddan Aram. Then Jacob came to his father Isaac at Mamre, or Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, and Abraham and Isaac where they had resided as aliens. Now the days of Isaac were 180 years, and Isaac breathed his last. He died and was gathered to his people, old and full of days. And his sons, Esau and Jacob, buried him. Now for his death, we know he was on his deathbed when Jacob left, and now we've had all these years, almost 30 years or so have passed, and now he's finally gotten to the point where he breathes his last. Now before we go on to 36, we will look at these things. Professor Fonrod, one of our main Old Testament scholars, tells us that from this point, from 16 on through 36, these passages are kind of gathering up all the pieces, the little stories and lists of names and so forth, and pulling them together and getting them in before we move on to Joseph down in Egypt and that whole story. Starts a whole new cycle. So they're actually, just kind of scraps that they picked up. And you know how people make quilts out of scraps of material? This is kind of a little quilt that's put together with various scraps. And so it's not really well organized and doesn't flow smoothly. It's just these events just put in there. But we have Rachel's death, birth of Benjamin, Reuben's crime or his moral affront, and then the list of sons. Now, Von Rad tells us that there is, to try to understand some of these things, and particularly this burial spot and naming of Bethlehem, he says that there is a law of the history of tradition in biblical scholarship. Has anybody run across this law of history of tradition in biblical scholarship? Well, I haven't found it either, but it's an unwritten law. And the unwritten part is that we must search for the source or the meaning and purpose of a biblical narrative in the geographical territory where the persons in the story resided. So if something is mentioned and we don't quite understand it, if we want to get a better understanding, then we look to archaeology and we look to other sources around that area and other parts of the history. Then it sometimes opens up and is revealed to us. Now, since Rachel is the mother of Joseph and Benjamin, that means we would look toward the territory where the Benjaminites and the descendants of Joseph would have settled. So the grave of Rachel does not lie in the territory of the Bethlehem of the Jesus birth narratives. That is not really the place where she would have been buried, because that Bethlehem is in Judea. This is a different territory. So Von Rad reminds us that in the cultic history, and much of it's oral and it's evolving continually, the movement of holy and sacred places is often related to economic and political conditions in the land. And so those take priority, so an actual historical site may not be so important as the economic and the cultic worship that surround whatever this place is or this artifact may be. Now, in our family history as Oklahomans, we know about this dynamic of moving something for political and economic reasons. We know that our original, or some of us do, that our original state capital was where? Guthrie. So how in the world did it end up in Oklahoma City? Well, there's a story. Well, it was the official seal, okay? The official seal that stamps legal documents and says they are official. Well, there's a lot of power if you hold the seal that says these documents are official and authoritative, and they will alter the course of history. Don't laws enacted alter the course of history? And if you can alter the course of history, you've got some power. And you also then have economic influence. So, the seal gets moved. Now, there's a legend in Karen's family from her dad, believes that there is, we think it might be Fred Branson, had something to do with stealing the seal and moving it from Guthrie. And so after we heard that, Bobby and I looked in the history books and looked it up. We couldn't find any mention of Fred Branson. Now, that doesn't mean it didn't happen and he wasn't a part of it, because this was a clandestine act. And if you're good at it, they don't see you coming, and they don't see you going, and they can't find you to arrest you. And so maybe he was, and maybe he wasn't. But anyway, these movements of a sacred artifact from one place to another could happen, does happen, and may have happened with this thing of moving or mentioning Bethlehem in the text at that time. But we don't know. But it could have been. Now we've got another change, and this is the name change. And I mentioned before the the kind of cloud or curse that would have been on little baby Ben Oni, that his dying mother, Rachel, wanted to name him. And that name would have meant son of my sorrow, recounting and remembering her death. Now, if he kept that name, every time he was introduced or had to introduce himself, then that tragedy and maybe shame, because if she died in childbirth, you're the child who caused her death. How do you feel about that? You going to wear that as a badge of honor? Probably not. So it was maybe an act of kindness that his father Jacob or Israel changes the name to Benjamin instead of Ben-Oni. So, but that turns the name to son of the right hand, and then a whole series of developments of how that evolves and means son of good fortune rather than son who is a curse. Now the Jamin word literally means quarter of heaven. So it's a part of heaven. So it's in the direction of heaven where they would look for where heaven might be. And they say that it is looking to the east. And so to the right would have been to the south. And so then the tribe of Benjamin, the name takes on a meaning of people of the south. And there was a large Bedouin confederation that did exist historically, and it spread to the south. And there is a mention in the Mari text from the 18th century before the Common Era of a Benjamin in the area. So it gives a little historical link to this people and that place as existing, and what we call extra biblical evidence. Now we don't really, since these are very sparse and they don't tell us a whole lot, but it does give us some historical link in this referring to this name and these people and that place residing in that general direction and area of the South. Now, one of the things that we don't usually realize from reading our Bible without the biblical scholars and the ancient Middle East historians is about these burial markers when Jacob or Israel erects a pillar as the site to remember Rachel, because it stood there a long time. Even to the day of the writing, it is still there now. So how do markers not get torn down and taken and used for building material for something else? How do they stay put? Well, somebody tends them. Somebody cares about them. And in the tending and the caring, what we here have is evidence of something that, like I say, if we don't read the historical works and the biblical scholars, we won't know why did it stay there so long and what was going on to preserve it there. And what was alive and well in a big part of the history of Israel before the Yahwist movement to be very strongly monotheistic, but even somewhat afterwards it would continue, that there was a cult of bereavement, or a cult of funerary, and they would erect these pillars and markers, and they would stand them up, and they had a belief in that there was a divine spirit, and particularly if this was a very important matriarch or patriarch, a part of their significance was that they had, an element of divinity. Now, we understand that in the area where folks believed that there were demons and spirits and angels and all kinds of non-human entities everywhere that paganism, polytheism. There are many, many gods, and there are great gods and little gods and various categories of gods. And so a patriarch or matriarch, to honor them and to recognize their power and significance, you bestow upon them an element of divinity. And that divine nature is in the stone. And you show it honor and respect by worshiping there and doing the acts of worship, which are pouring oil or wine or grain offerings at that place. Now, when you've got that happening at that place, often you need to hire someone to take care of it. So you get a priest, a cultic leader, to manage it. Now, it may not be a full-time job, but in order to maintain it, then someone has to take responsibility. And so once someone is invested in that responsibility and it brings them benefit, then they want to keep it going to reap the benefit, and they would pass sometimes the privilege or right from generation to generation. This is part of the family inheritance and business. You have the cultic right. And in these religions, you didn't have to be a pure and moral person. You didn't have to have any particular skills and training. You just had to do the job. And it was in the culture, the belief, we put a heavy weight on belief. But in these areas, I mean, you can believe whatever you want. You could have any kind of gods you want. The belief thing wasn't the critical issue. It was the performing the act of burning the incense or making the offering. And that's what got the Christians in so much trouble, is they refused to do that. And the Jews as well refused to do the act of being a part of the community-wide offering to Zeus or to the emperor or whatever. And when something bad happened, they're looking for, why did it happen? Who's at fault? Those Christians, they didn't make the offerings. And so the God is angry, and the God is punishing us with the bad things that happen. Well, let's go teach them a lesson. And that's what spurred a lot of the persecution of Christians. It wasn't about what do you believe or don't believe. We've got to make you believe something different. It was just, you aren't making the sacrifices. When you don't make the sacrifices, our gods get angry. They want everybody to make the sacrifice, and when they get angry, we all suffer. So we're tired of that suffering. We're going to make you suffer to either kill you dead so you're out of the picture, or to get you to change your mind and make the offering. So there were lots of offerings and things going on, and this funerary cult was in existence in these times. But when the Yahwist gained power, they did alter it, and it wasn't as strong, but it was still in existence and still prevalent. It's hard to break very local emotional customs. So, and we still have a little bit of that idol worship today with significant people, where we have there's a lucrative tie to it with super athletes. People buy the jerseys with their names and their numbers on them, and shoes and all kinds of things that way, and then recording artists, and folks want to buy their posters, and there's a real market. There's a lucrative business in this idolizing people and this idolatry, we would call, because in a sense they're worshiping that person in a way. So then we get to the Reuben laying with Bilhah, Rachel's maidservant, and Jacob. She's called Jacob, or Israel's concubine, in that passage. But she's also the mother of Reuben's half-brothers, Dan and Naphtali. And I mentioned last time that being the handmaiden, Rachel dies. Bilhah may have been in great grief and sorrow, and Reuben may have gone to comfort her, and then things happen. You ever watch any of the soap operas, you see all kinds of things happening that are weird and bizarre in sexual relationships. But Von Rad adds that this place where this happens is a place that was called Migdal Eder, and the name translates to cattle tower. So evidently this was a marker, not a worship place, but a landmark that would let the traveling nomadic herdspeople know that this is a good place. And it didn't go into it, but there may very well have been sources of water or a well close by that they would tend to gather there, and that would be the geographical marker that you found the place. And then he points out that after Reuben is with Bilhah and Jacob knows about it, then it just cuts off there. It doesn't say, so what did he do about it? What did he say? How did he react? It just chops it off. And it goes on. Now it picks up other places, references are made to it, and we don't know whether that piece was lost in whatever written material he had and he didn't have it or decided not to use it, but it just is not there. So, and then it goes on to naming all of these sons. And we notice in the list of sons that Dinah is not mentioned. Of course, it says these are the sons. It doesn't say these are the children. And so the whole reason for naming the sons is they take on the names of tribes. And the reason for all of these lists is giving the history of where did the tribes come from and when did they get started and that sort of thing, and how they get their territories. Anyway, so then we get the account of Jacob moving on, and they have this other scrap they've got to throw in there of his father Isaac, still alive at Mamre, but he's finally about to die, and he's near Hebron. Isaac dies, Jacob and Esau bury him. And Von Rad suggests that this is probably the same place that Abraham was buried, so they're gathered with their fathers and the ancestors. So he was there. But Jacob and Esau then are there together. And this source that the redactor is using doesn't seem to be aware of the long passage of time or the alienation and the sojourn of Jacob far away and coming back. It's just like it picks up, this little passage picks up from the piece much earlier, and just when he was on his deathbed, and now he has died. And then they insert that piece at this place. But we also have Isaac and Ishmael came together to bury Abraham. Now we have Jacob and Esau coming back together to bury Isaac. Now we still have that a lot today. When a parent dies, then siblings come back together, and there's hardly any other event that will get family to come together and the siblings like the death of the parent. Sometimes at weddings, when the siblings' children, the cousins, the nieces and nephews have a wedding, sometimes folks will pretty well gather for those, but not as well. It's hard to make the time and fix the schedules to make that happen, but when there's a death, that's a very high priority to make time and to come. But in the coming together, it's not always hugs and kisses, because sometimes there can be some healing and some reconciliation if there have been old hurts and misunderstandings, that those are overcome and healing, reconciliation takes place. But sometimes old issues that have been swept under the rug and ignored and stuffed under the emotional stress, those sometimes just kind of boil over. And all of a sudden there's a big fight over something, some big issue that is a trivial issue, but it's a principle of the thing. And then there become hurts and misunderstandings. And then when you get past the funeral, then you get to settling the estate. Then there can be other issues that came up. I think I've used this little example that sometimes it's the one says, I've never actually heard it, but I've felt this is the dynamic going on as I've known the history is, well, you got all the love our whole life long. By golly, now it's my turn. I get the stuff. and so there's a lot of hurt going on there instead of peace and love and hugs and kisses. Anyway, I could probably spend a couple of sessions on all those dynamics and different reasons for them and how to work through them, but not today, maybe a later time. But now we get to chapter 36, and did anybody read ahead and work on those names and want to read those to us? Help us with all of those? Well, 36 goes through, these are the descendants of Esau, that is Edom, and Esau took his wives from the Canaanites, Adah, daughter of Elon the Hittite, and Oholibamah, daughter of Anna, son of Zibeon the Hivite, and Basemath, Ishmael's daughter, sister of Nebaioth. Adah bore Eliphaz to Esau, Basemath bore Ruel, and Oholibamah bore Yeshush, and Korah. These are sons of Esau who were born to him in the land of Canaan. And then Esau took his wives, his sons and daughters, and all the members of his household, his cattle and all his livestock and all his property that he had acquired in the land of Canaan, and he moved to a land some distance from his brother Jacob. For their possessions were too great for them to live together. The land where they were staying could not support them because of their livestock. So Esau settled in the hill country of Seir. Esau is Edom. It tells us again, he is Edom. This guy becomes that tribe of Edom. And these are the descendants of Esau, ancestor of the Edomites, in the hill country of Seir. And these are the names of Esau's sons. So it goes on and on and on. We name all of these people, and we get them repeated several times through this. And then we get to, in 31, these are the kings who reigned in the land of Edom before any king reigned over the Israelites. Bela, son of Beor, reigned in Edom, the name of his city being Dinhabah. And Bela died, and Jobab. Now that's a good name to suggest to your friends. Jobab. That has a nice flow to it. Nobody else in the class would be called Jobab, right? Jobab. I kind of like that, Jobab. Anyway, son of Zerah of Borzah succeeded him as king, and Jobab died, and Husham of the land of Temanites succeeded him as king, and Husham died, and Hadad, son of Bedad, who defeated Midian in the country of Moab, succeeded him as king, the name of his city being Avith. Hadad died, and Samlah of Masrekah succeeded him as king. And Samlah died, and Shaul of Rehoboth on the Euphrates succeeded him as king. Shaul died, and Baal-Hanan, son of Anchor, succeeded him as king. And Baal-Hanan, son of Apar, died, and Hadar succeeded him as king, the name of his city being Pau. His wife's name was Mehetabel, the daughter of Matrad, daughter of Mezahab. Now these are the names of the clans of Esau, according to their families and their localities by their names. The clans Timon, Avilah, Jetheth, Oholibamah, and Elah, Pinion, Kinzah, Timon, Mizpah, Magdiel, and Iram. These are the clans of Edom. That is Esau, the father of Edom. So now he was Esau equals Edom. Now he's Esau, the father of Edom, according to their settlements in the land that they had held. Now we know why preachers do not preach every passage in the Bible, because there's not a whole lot of lesson for us there. But of these lists, two of the traditions are about this Esau and Edom, and they follow very closely. If you take the time to chart them out and map them out, you see that there is a whole lot of repetition, but we have several places where they diverge. But where they do follow each other, they seem to be from the Toleth book of the priestly source, which was these long lists of begats and begats and begats and so forth. But earlier we heard that Esau took these Hittite wives that Sarah and Abraham did not care for, and they caused them great difficulty and upset. And but then Esau realized that those wives made his parents unhappy, so he decided to try to fix it. So he would find a daughter of Ishmael, and that daughter would be Mahlah. Now, there was, of the daughters, there was a daughter of Elon, Basemath, but later Basemath becomes the daughter of Ishmael in one of these lists, and then this Oholibamah shows up, and we've got several wives, but they're not all distinct. They're different names. Basically, he's only supposed to have had 3. But we've got many, many different names. From 36:2, we've got his having a Judith, daughter of Beri, the Hittite, and then Basemath, daughter of Elon, the Hittite, and then, but we had in 28:8, Ishmael's daughter was Mahalath, and then we come up with Adah and Oholibamah as the wives, 2 of the wives, and then Basemath as Ishmael's daughter as the 3. So an Adah, Obibilah, and Basemath. But then we had Judith and Basemath and Mahalath as the 3 wives. And it's confusing. And so anyway, and particularly when they're given different parents. So this is really an excellent example of how the various materials that the redactor of Genesis has pulled together, they don't match, and they have had changes in them from whatever the original historical reality is, and in that process, all kinds of things and reasons for changing these names have occurred that we don't know about, and some of them they're just plain confusion and mistakes, and other times it's political reasons why, or other reasons to change things. But what this is all about is trying to tell us that the Edom and the Edomites and the Ammonites and the Moabites and others, that the Hebrew people were encountering, and in the areas where they were moving around in their early history, they encountered these people, and there had been, the historical records show, that there had been a large invasion of tribes, of peoples, who had pushed in from the east into Palestine with those names about 1200 before the Common Era. And this was called the Aramean invasion of those people. And they were kind of Semitic tribes, not too different from the Hebrew people. but they were not exactly the same people. Now, it's interesting about the list of the kings. As I was reading that, all of these people who became the next king were son of somebody else. This was not an indication of a dynasty where there was a king, and then this king's son succeeded the king, and then that king died, and then that king's son succeeded that king. These were all different people from different tribes and groups, and then they talked about where did they live. Well, they lived in different places, so they kept their kind of capital city at different places. Now, what this shows is not a highly developed empire that had gathered all this power and gone out and conquered all these people and centralized all of that power and wealth and had built temples and palaces and city walls and fortifications. But this was a more primitive kind of kingship, but it was moving away from the simply nomadic tribal chieftains of their groups, but they were in settled cities where the power was beginning to concentrate in the settled cities, and the form of government of having a king was developing. And it developed in Edom before it did with the children of Israel. But the similar way of a non-dynastic way of developing it, like the early Israelites in the northern kingdom, and like the judges, the story of the judges, it wasn't dynasty. There was a need for a strong leader, and so this person becomes the king and is the strong leader, but their headquarters is wherever they were. They didn't recruit them to come to Washington and live in the White House. Wherever they had their power and their experience and so forth, that became the center of the government in these early times. So anyway, so all of these different names and places that we have are of all these other people, but we keep coming back to the sons of Jacob, who become the 12 tribes of Israel that will be the Jewish people. So the history is, we're in Genesis, the beginnings, the origins, and so this part of the story is trying to help the children of Israel understand who they are now after the exile, when this was being written, and in order to reform and rebuild themselves to be a significant people. Now, a part of that is that we have it boiling down to the 12 tribes of Israel, and that's who we are. But these Edomites and Ammonites and all of those other names, then the reason they keep listing those is to say, that's who we are not. These are not who we are. And so they may be close, we may have ties, and we may get along with them at different times, and then at different times we may fight with them in these struggles over territory. But it's a way of trying to understand who we are and who we are not. That sense of identity, and a part of that process, like the funerary cults and the household gods. Remember when they were moving the central place of worship from Shechem to Bethel, that Jacob told his family, give me all the household gods. Give me the earrings that are a symbol of worshiping the moon god. And then he gathered them up and he buried them. Well, one part of that, the history might have been that he was going to go back and dig them up, but in the storyline, it's a concentration of the worship into one place, and let's end all of these household gods and these little shrines and temples around. We believe in one God, Yahweh. Now, the evolution of that is, first, Yahweh is the biggest, strongest God, the most important God, and He's a God who is not located geographically to one spot at the shrine or at the temple or at the sacred oak. This God is bigger than all of those kinds of gods. Now, it's hard to you can get people to say, okay, I can go along with that, but these local gods, they're too much in my blood and in my history and in my habits. So to get rid of that, it took a long time, and it was hard to stamp that out. And if we read through the Old Testament, we keep finding that the people kept going back to those things. They couldn't stick with this monotheism. They just had too many bad habits they couldn't break. So anyway, that's part of that we are running into. But the story is trying to help the people make that move to a strong monotheism and a strong identity of who they are over and against those other people. And part of who we are is we are the people who follow our God's commandments faithfully. That's what sets us apart. We can't do like and hang out with and keep, worshiping and doing things with those other people. We have to be set apart and be different. And so we get pieces of that, but that's the theme that's running through these. And when they don't seem to make any sense, if we can remember that theme, that's what this is a part of, all of that. Let's see. So, the election of the kings of Edom, their election, they were elected, and it was a charismatic leader or prophetic leader or someone who had been successful in a conquest, but they ruled by their own right and power, and not because they had inherited the throne, because the father had died and now they're in a dynasty, and they will be, the king is dead, long live the king, the new king, kind of thing. So, I've run out of stuff before we get to Joseph's story. Now, anybody going to be at Inverness or Methodist Manor or Montereau for our little traveling services on the 23rd? Barbara's going to be there? Okay. Well, I was going to give my little spiel that I was going to do about the Christmas story. You can go back to sleep and then I'll wake you up at the manor. Because we got some time left and there just wasn't enough stuff there. But yeah, why are you telling us all about these Edomites? Yeah, we're not them. Even though they are kind of relatives, and we should have kind feelings for them and all, but in reality, they weren't the chosen ones, and they aren't all that faithful in following God, because they are off. He went off and he married 2 Hittite women, and he's worshiping and behaving in ways that are upsetting to us. He's abandoned our traditions. So, the text I was going to have to deal with now, the birth of Jesus, the Messiah, took place in this way when his mother Mary had been engaged to Joseph, but before they lived together, she was found to be with child. Now that part is distressing. Before they came together, she was found to be with child from the Holy Spirit. Her husband Joseph, being a righteous man and unwilling to expose her to public disgrace, planned to dismiss her quietly. But just when he had resolved to do this, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream and said, Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife, for the child conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will bear a son, and you are to name him Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins. All this took place to fulfill what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet. Look, a virgin in the Greek, but in the Hebrew, a young woman shall conceive and bear a son, and they shall name him Emmanuel, which means God with us. And when Joseph awoke from sleep, he did as the angel of the Lord commanded him. He took her as his wife, but had no marital relations with her until she had borne a son, and he named him Jesus. Anybody heard that story before? Yes.
You jumped right in the middle, but I've always wondered about Matthew's account of the genealogy of Jesus, and he tracks Jesus' genealogy going all the way back to Abraham, right?
Yeah.
Through
and Luke,
Joseph,
right?
Through the dad's side, but Jesus was not a product of Joseph and Mary's union.
Correct.
So the genealogy to me is dichotic, doesn't hold.
Right, and then Luke goes all the way back to creation. Right. Well, there are reasons for that, and part of it's, well, here's part of the background. The biblical scholars have shown us how the birth narratives of the Christmas story from the gospel were late in developing. They were late in developing. One of the main reasons was the early Christians believed that Jesus was the Son of Man who was coming to bring in the kingdom of God. So, get ready because it's coming, this is it. There is no reason to sit around and gather up stories about Jesus' infancy and early childhood because that's in the past. The important thing is what is coming and what is coming down now. And what is coming and what is coming down now is God has come to deliver us from this horrible Roman oppression, and the kingdom of God is coming in its fullness, and let's get ready because it's coming now. Well, that's what they felt for the first year, 2, 3, 10, 20, 30 years that it's coming now, but it didn't like they thought. And so later, it's not until the gospel writers of the evangelists have put together and found some stories that are about the birth narratives. Mark lists none, and John, in his theology, really doesn't give a birth narrative. So this was delayed for some time, and so as the stories came together, these stories really are not meant to be, and the evangelists didn't go out and try to find witnesses. These are theological narrative. It's a story in order to teach the believing community something about the faith. And so the stories are developed to do that. And so when we hear the story, if we hear them and listen to them with the ear of what is the lesson this is trying to teach me about the faith, then we hear it differently. We begin to hear the text. Now, the birth of Jesus, the Messiah, took place in this way. Now, scholars tell us that birth is not the best word to use there, but rather the real word is the origin. And the origin is not so much Jesus, but when it goes Jesus, the Messiah. The origin of the Messiah took place this way. And then when we get those words, origin, we're put back to creation. And creation is God says, and it was, and God created things and put them in order for a purpose. So the word origin really should be there to make us think God is in control. This rather than a birth that we understand is caused by human sexuality. See, that's where you went right away. You know, we're talking about the genealogy through Joseph, but he wasn't a part of this. And that's the point. This isn't about human sexuality and some random sexual act and totally irrational. Are sexual acts rational? But something else, God's plan of order and reason and purpose. That's what this is about. This is how it came about. And that's the focus of this story. It is God's activity, it is God's purpose, it is God's plan, it's on God's time, and it is the right time. And so it's stating the origin of Jesus the Messiah, emphasis on the Messiah, is one that we are to understand. God is making this happen. And so Messiah, for the Hebrew people, this is to be a great leader to save us, to lead us out from under the power of the oppression. So this is about God's mighty acts of the salvation. And then applies to or refers to the the prophet who tells a young woman will bear a son and he will be named Emmanuel, which means God with us. And so we start getting a lot of words about names. Jesus, Yahshua, God saves. So we get all of those things going on here. And then, got to hurry, the other focus is on Joseph. It starts off, his first reaction is not outrage and embarrassment and shame. What will people think about me? His first concern is about Mary and not to embarrass her and put her into shame. But he's a righteous man. He has to follow the customs of the day. She's pregnant. It doesn't matter whether she was raped, whether she and he got together and had premarital sex. It doesn't matter. She is pregnant before the official time to come together. That is unacceptable in the culture. And so he thinks to dismiss her quietly, prevent the shame and slander and so forth. But he gets this dream, but then after the dream, he takes her as his wife. And they bear this son. Now the community knows she was pregnant before they came.